There's a 5 alarm fire in our nation. We're having conversations about something. I don't think it's about right and left anymore. I don't think it's about Democrat versus Republican. I think there's a good versus evil issue going on, and God's people need to emerge. Welcome to Faith Wins. I'm Chad Conley. This is a place for real conversations, real leadership, and real faith, because when pastors lead, faith wins. Hey everybody, Chad back with the Faith Wins podcast today, and I hope you're well. And we're just going into this season of the midterms, and I get a lot of questions. And why do you do what you do? Why Faith Wins? Why your methodology? Why pastors? Why Christians? Aren't they all voting anyway? And I got to tell you, I know I've done my story on this a little bit. I want to keep remembering, and also want to keep reminding people, because we're adding pastors to our network every single week. And I started Faith Wins because I felt very strongly that Christians were being neglected, ignored, suppressed, taken for granted by the political class. I'm not mad at them. They're making their decisions. Everybody's got an agenda. But I also thought about our response as Christians. I'm a Christian first. I happen to be a conservative. I happen to have been a Republican Party chairman of the state and to work for the Republican National Committee. But I'm a Christian first. I have a responsibility and an obligation. Let me read you some words of Jesus in Revelation that really strikes me about our response to the things going on. This is from Revelation 3:15-17. I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would that thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Because thou sayest, I am rich and increase with goods, and have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. Right here, Jesus is talking. John is giving us the Revelation, the last book of the Bible. And Jesus is talking. I wish you were cold or hot. I wish you were passionate or ambivalent. The problem is you're lukewarm. And I just assume you be really cold and you don't care, or really hot and passionate about something, than to be lukewarm and just nonchalant about it. Jesus said himself, he would spit us out of his mouth. He would spit the lukewarm out of his mouth. That's on us, y'all. So see if this is the right definition. There's about 80 million people who proclaim Christ. 82 million, according to George Barna, and I trust Barna's numbers more than anybody else because he actually interviews Christians, and his definitions aren't as cloudy as Pew and Gallup and all the other research companies. So 80 couple million people sitting in church on a typical Sunday, only 35 million vote. What do you call the 30 or 35 or 45 million non-voting Christians if you don't call them lukewarm? I don't know. Maybe they are just cold. But I think this is our responsibility. I started reaching out to pastors and building a pastor network, not through a political lens, but a biblical one, because I saw this happening. And y'all, I got to tell you, we're in a 5 alarm fire in our nation. The country's on fire. It's crazy what's going on. I never thought, not a million years, would I have imagined that we have an entire political party. Again, I don't believe it's about parties or people. I think it's about policies and principles. But there's an entire political party that is siding with this entire trans insanity. And we ought to cater to people's feelings instead of facts. And ignoring little girls going to the shower privately, or going to the bathroom privately, or the locker room privately, or even competing in sports with other girls. And this insistence by an entire national party that boys can be girls, boys can get pregnant, boys ought to be racing and swimming and competing against little girls. Boys should go to the girls' bathrooms if they feel like it. Listen, how old were you when you figured out your feelings will betray you? How old were you when you figured out don't ever make decisions on feelings? I remember being 16, 17, 18, maybe even 20, and thinking I had all the answers. Life happens. You graduate from college, you get a job, you get married, you get a house, you rent a house, you buy a car, have kids. I realized not only did I not have the answers, I didn't know what the questions were. And I think this happens to a lot of people who are being seduced by this trans insanity. That's just one example. We got a whole set of people that seem they'll protest anything. They'll protest illegal aliens. They ought to stay in America. And they won't protest for the girls that were murdered or raped or maimed by those illegal aliens. We got a group of people who protest for Hamas. They'll wear the Hamas outfits and they'll protest against Christianity and against Israel because we defend Israel. They'll protest Christians. They'll protest. Goodness, last week or two, the president's administration decided, there are 40 water fountains and cascading water fountains in Washington, D.C. We ought to clean them up. It'll be aesthetically pleasing. It'll be nice. It'll look better. People will be attracted to it. They cleaned up 40 water fountains in Washington, D.C., and the progressive left marched. And it's the same screaming, ranting, that shill, just angry screaming where you look at people and go, don't you have a job? Don't you have any purpose other than protest even fountains getting cleaned up? Listen, we're in a 5-alarm fire. It's pretty clear that the left, whenever they do get power again, they're not interested in advancing the country anymore. They're interested in dismantling our country. This entire red-green alliance, it's a description of the Marxist, progressive, communist thinking people, the LGBT, trans, radical, militant, homosexual community, the environmental community. It's this confluence of a bunch of lefty groups that seem more intent on tearing the country down than building it up. This is real. The push for Sharia law, to think that the progressive Marxist left would ally with the Muslim, the radical jihadis who want to cut your head off if you're a Christian or a Jew, that want to behead and maim and kill you, who want to end the nation of Israel, and a lot of topics to talk about that we're going to cover on the podcast. But today I want to talk to you as a Christian. What's it going to take to get you, pastor, off the sidelines? Now, if you're watching our podcast, you're probably off the sidelines, but I need you to do a whole lot more. Our nation needs you to do a whole lot more. I believe there's a 5-alarm fire. Former Biden and Obama advisor Susan Rice said on a Sunday show not too long ago and she basically laid it out to corporations and groups that were siding with a conservative agenda. She said, we, the left, will be back in charge and you better look out. She just said the quiet part out loud. They're looking for retribution on people who sided with cleaning up the country, closing the southern border, defending Israel and having a peaceful Middle East, running out illegals who are killing people, on and on and on and on and on. The threats have been laid out. I think we're in a 5-alarm fire. I want to read something else to you from a devotional actually that got me going on this. And this is from a Brigadier General Air Force buddy of mine. If we are truly Christians, we have heard the gospel and received Christ as our Savior. If we're members of Bible preaching churches, I know y'all are, then we have heard his word proclaimed. If we have God honoring pastors, then we have seen Christ through others. So what have we done to put the learning, receiving, hearing, and seeing into action? What have we done? Sadly, many of us have done very little other than take up space in pews while we have passively played the role of observers. Since the beginning of my ministry, and this is General John Tykert, retired, I've been particularly sensitive to our lack of action. I've heard Christians complain about the sad condition of our nation. A lot of us are guilty of that. I've heard Christians wish that someone else would take the lead to solve these monumental problems. I've seen Christians resign themselves to living in a country that's rapidly diverging from a Christ-centered foundation. I've watched Christians surrender to worldly influences. I've noticed an unwillingness to follow those who do take the lead for Christ. I have seen little action. I echo you, General Tykert. Fortunately, the God of peace stands ready to act alongside of the faithful. Where are the faithful in America? I think they're watching this right now, and a lot more too, by the way. There's a bunch of us. Hopefully, they're on their knees imploring God to act in this land. Hopefully, they're on their knees begging God for strength to take the first step of faith. Hopefully, they're encouraging others to pray. Please pray that American Christians would act boldly for Christ. Without the willingness to do anything about our nation's problems, we should not expect tomorrow to be any better than today. We got to pray that Christians would shake off the dust. They would shake off the lethargy. They'd shake off the laziness. They'd shake off the inaction. We got to pray that people would begin to act. Just recently, our organization co-hosted with a pro-family group in South Carolina, a faith forum. Since early January, early in the season, politically in South Carolina, we have a bunch of open seats for governor, attorney general, U.S. Senate has a contested race, but candidates are everywhere. And so we determined we weren't going to endorse anybody. We were going to do pastor meetings with as many as we could. And we've done about 70 pastor meetings with every candidate who would sit with pastors, not to endorse them, not to ask gotcha questions, but to build a relationship. And we tell them 5 things. We're going to hand pick who comes. It's a private meeting. There's no media. We're going to ask the hard questions. We're going to pray over you. That's our ask. Of the 6 governor candidates, 2 didn't come to a single meeting. That's disqualifying in my book. Now, they both proclaimed to be Christians. One came to one meeting, and as soon as we asked about the issue of gambling, they stood up and they're ready to leave. 2 were ready to do as many meetings as we could. One was confined by is a representative by the calendar, but was willing to do more. And then for attorney general, all 3 candidates did it. For U.S. Senate, both candidates, in fact, there were 3 and 1 dropped out, they did it. We had over 800 different pastors in those pastor meetings in a 4 or 5 month span. Just put them in that environment. So we announced our faith forum as kind of a culmination of all those meetings to just have a dialogue. There were 20 something debates and forums for the governor's race alone, but only one was totally dedicated to the evangelical vote. They're going to speak to us as evangelicals. And in South Carolina in particular, almost 70% of the primary vote is self-proclaimed Christians. This vote matters. And by the way, it matters in every state. We need to do this in your state too. And again, it's not about just endorsing somebody or being on stage for pictures. It's about building relationships. So if they do mess up, if they do something that's kind of weird, don't go to Facebook and type some hateful, angry response. Text them, call them, get in touch with their staff. Let them know how you feel. Listen, this was done because not enough candidates at any of those levels, and I'm betting your state too, not enough of those candidates are saying, hey, what do the pastors think about this issue? Boy, can you get a hold of some pastors? We made sure that if that strikes them, they know some pastors. We also made sure in every meeting, I told pastors, you get the cell phone numbers and the emails for these staffers. So if something comes up, we can have a real conversation, not browbeat them, not go on social media and talk bad about them, not tell bad things about their friends, but really get to know them. Have a relationship that builds on something and create a level of trust. Then you know what? They'll actually listen to you. We've done this with presidential candidates, governor candidates, Senate, U.S. Congress, State House, State Senate, attorneys general. We've done this in a bunch of states now. We need to do it in every single state. But I tell you that to tell you this. So we put out there on social media, and 2 things about this I think are striking you ought to hear about. We put on social media promoting this, and we sent it to all the pastors who have been in our private meetings. And one pastor from one particular denomination that just actually split over the whole conservative liberal discussion thing, this pastor knew the host pastor of the host church outside of Columbia, South Carolina. And this pastor, who happened to be from the Charleston area, emailed and then called my friend, the host pastor, and said, hey, I'm really glad you're doing this, and I'd like to get more involved, but my seminary, my denomination tells us to stay away from politics. Is this legal? The host pastor kind of laughed and said, of course it's legal. I'm sorry you've been lied to, but why wouldn't it be legal? We're going to have a conversation about faith and evangelical issues. We're going to encourage Christians to go vote biblical values. What would be illegal about that? I thought it was pretty interesting. The second thing I thought was interesting, and I've got so many stories to tell you about this that y'all ought to hear, is one of the consultants, a young guy, and he don't know nothing. You know, I think he's a casual faith person, and I don't want to place judgment on him, but based on what I can tell, he's pretty casual. So the church counted 450 people at the faith forum, but it's in a big auditorium. And so we were going to say, over 400, maybe nearly 500, because certainly people were filtering around and, some in the bathroom, some out at the tables and display tables outside. People were meandering everywhere when this particular candidate staff came in. So this staffer told one of our team members, "Oh, so I guess there were about 200 people here," intentionally minimizing the faith importance. That is why we work through Faith Wins. That is why I'm building a pastor network. I want to build a pastor network so big, so dominant that no candidate from any party can ignore your voice. They need to see your votes, and they know math. They need to hear your voices. That only comes through a relationship. You know, when we started Faith Wins, we did a meeting in a certain state with a certain U.S. candidate nominee. There were three running for a primary. Of course, we, like always, we invited all the Democrats, all the Republicans. The Democrats don't tend to show up when we ask them to tell us about their faith. But anyway, all three Republican candidates were going to come. And the punchline will be who this candidate is. And their staff, and this is back to the consultants. I know we've talked about this on some podcasts, and it's important that you understand where they're coming from and what their worldview is, so you understand most of them aren't with you, okay? So this staff calls my host pastor, who was outside of Dayton, Ohio, and Pastor Josiah was a little bit, he was taken aback because the candidate staff said, "Hey, we want to come to this. We'd love to meet pastors, but we're just not sure that what Chad's doing, this methodology, is legal." So Pastor Josiah calls me and said, "What do I tell them?" I said, "You tell those knuckleheads we have lawyers too." I called my Christian law group, who happens to be in Mason, Ohio, and they said, "Oh yeah, we'd love to handle this one. Please let me know." So Pastor Josiah calls the staff, and the staff, again, not the candidate, the staff, the consultants are feeding them with, "This may not be legal." Unbelievable. I put my attorneys on the phone with their campaign staff and their attorneys, and here's what my attorney said. "We have so much confidence in Chad's methodology. The meeting that you're invited to is in our law offices in Mason, Ohio. It's Christian Law Association." And by the way, the candidate who did, and he showed up, and I prayed with him privately, Pastor Josiah and I did. It was a guy named JD Vance. It was JD Vance's staff when he was running for U.S. Senate that didn't trust us enough. And they'll go to any meeting, right? Anytime people are gathered, a politician will show up. The candidate wants to get them around them, not those Christians. The candidate's staff, the consultants, were concerned that the Christians were doing something illegal. Let me ask you a question. Where in the First Amendment or anywhere else do you as a Christian or a pastor lose your First Amendment rights because you're behind a pulpit? I don't think you've lost First Amendment rights at all. In fact, I think your rights are expanded because you're God's leader. You're standing behind that pulpit. And you know what? God's people need to hear from God's leaders. There's a 5-alarm fire in our nation. We're having conversations about something. I don't think it's about right and left anymore. I don't think it's about Democrat versus Republican. I think there's a good versus evil issue going on. And God's people need to emerge. God's people need to rise up and say, "Wait a minute. This is ridiculous what's going on. Let's vote for truth. Let's vote for biblical issues. Let's take a look at the issues and examine them and see what God says. Let's take a platform comparison. What are the parties? What do the candidates stand for?" See, here's what's tough about this. The responsibility becomes ours as Christians in a self-governing society like America, a constitutional republic that's celebrating 250 years birthday this year, that was based on the idea of self-government. That means you, pastor, and you, congregants, you people in the pews, non-voting Christians, we have the responsibility to get informed. Can't sit on the sideline. It is not an option. Jesus said we got to be salt and light, and we can't be salty salt if we're in the shaker. We can't be bright light if we're hidden under a bushel. No, it's on us. On our website, faithwins.org, we have voter guides for every state. As they come out, we'll put them on there. One in particular we're already using is Ralph Reed's Faith and Freedom Voter Guide and American Family Association's iVoter Guide. We have those down to very local levels, county and district levels in a bunch of states already. iVoter Guide, it's on faithwins.org. Faith and Freedom, Ralph Reed's organization out of Georgia. They do a terrific job with voter guides. It informs Christians on how people stand on the issues. Not Republican, not Democrat, not candidate push, but a push for here's what God says about issues that are confronting society. Pastors, it's on me and you. Tell the truth. You have a responsibility to your congregation. This pastor from the low country of South Carolina who said his seminary taught him not to do politics. What a shame. What a shame. What a shame somebody's told not to inform their congregants. No wonder this denomination just split. Thankfully, this guy's from the side of that split that chose the Bible. The side of the other group that chose not the Bible, they're going to go with the culture. You know, Jesus said he doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. It's our turn to emerge and step up into the fray. Your people need your wisdom, your help with discernment in these days. All the clutter, all the noise, all the nonsense. Pastors, they need your guidance. Till next time, you keep doing the right things, telling the truth to your people, engage this culture. Now's the time. God bless you. We'll see you again next time. Thank you for listening to Faith Wins. Be sure to subscribe and share this episode. And remember, when pastors lead, faith wins.